So Crystal Maldonado is right over there, and she is the author of Fat Chance Charlie Vega, which hopefully some of you read. That's what we're going to be talking about today. I've taken this from her website. She's an author with a lot of feelings.
That's true.
She by day, she's a social media manager at UMass Amherst. She likes Beyonce and shopping, and she writes at night, and she lives in Western Mass with her husband and daughter and dog, and we are just so lucky to have her here today. I was telling her earlier that when I read the book, just coinciding with the beginning of classes, and I have to admit that I may have neglected some students' emails, some administrators' emails, some colleagues' emails, because I was so absorbed in the book. It is really just full of delightful characters, snappy writing, and a lot of joy. And so if you haven't read it, I just really recommend it. So
thank you, that's so nice. And also I'm here, this is my first in-person event that I've done. I've done some virtual ones, but nothing in person, so I'm really grateful to be here, so thank you.
Yeah, no, it's all true. So I just thought I would start out with a few questions.
Yeah.
Every book has a kind of origin story.
Yes.
So I'm really curious to hear the origin story of this book.
So the origin story for Fat Chance Charlie Vega, I think, was kind of a long time coming. So I have always loved reading about love, even like from middle school. Like I just loved reading about people figuring themselves out and finding their person and just experiencing those first feelings, and I loved it. And I was that person who was yearning, and like I wanted to find love. And so as I would read these books in high school especially, I just was like, wow, these characters are amazing, but none of them look anything like me in these books. They were always very thin, they never had glasses, they didn't have curly hair, they weren't brown. Like it just felt like I was so unlike these characters who got to have these beautiful stories and who got to be the heroine. And so I wanted to make a book that sort of teen Crystal would have really loved to have read when she was about 14, 15 years old, and have this character of Charlie embody a lot of the characteristics that I have, that I was maybe insecure about or ashamed about when I was younger, and have that become a source of real joy for her and empowerment. And for anybody who shares characteristics with Charlie or who kind of can relate to this idea of wanting love and of wanting to find their person, they get to hopefully read this book and see themselves in her and feel validated that here is this fat girl, she's brown, she's cute, and she gets the boy. Like it's I just wanted that like happily ever after for somebody like Charlie.
Yeah, it's you did it. I like that. If that's what you wanted to do, you definitely did it.
Thank you.
But the book is also, and I guess this is this afternoon session is often about writing, right? Mm-hmm. And so one of the things about the characters about Charlie is that she is a writer.
She totally is.
And in the book is sort of full of ideas and sort of practices of writing and creativity, because the guy, I'm not going to give too much away, I hope, is also very creative.
Yes.
Right? And so and sort of thinking about art and fiction sort of occupy a lot of space in the book, and it's really kind of layered that way, sort of a story inside a story kind of thing, which is also really lovely. So I was wondering if you could just talk a little bit about what writing means to Charlie.
Yeah, so I wanted Charlie to have this love for writing and books and reading, because it has such a deep space in my heart, and so I wanted to give her that joy as well. And then Brian, who is her love interest, also has an appreciation just for art, and the two of them have an art class together. And so for Charlie, writing ends up being this vehicle that I think allows her to feel more powerful than she does in her real life. She kind of gets to become this writer and create these stories that she wishes she could live. And so it becomes this like wish fulfillment, I think, for her. And so she writes about these romances, and yet she has never been kissed, but she kind of gets to feel like she gets to do that when she's creating these characters. And then the other piece of it for her is when we meet her at the start of the book, we see that she is living with her mom, and her dad had passed on a couple of years prior. And so that was writing and creating was something that had brought the two of them together. And so I like to look at the writing piece for Charlie as something that allows her to connect to her dad, who's no longer here, and kind of remember him and pay tribute to him in that way. And just kind of be creative and have this outlet, because there's a lot that Charlie thinks and feels, because I too have a lot of feelings, and when you're 16 you have a lot of feelings, and I think you never grow out of that. And so to have a productive way for her to sort of channel that energy, I think is really helpful for her. And journaling ends up being something that helps her kind of towards the end of the book as she's figuring out where does she want to go and what comes next. And for people who do relate to creating, I think once you find that thing, and it doesn't have to be writing, and it can be any type of creating, once you find that, I think it just helps ground you in a way that a lot of other things may not.
So yeah, and in terms of your own writing process, one of the things that I really loved about the book is that it's full of wisdom. Like there's a lot of the characters are quite wise, and there are these moments where you think, yeah, that's a really sort of lovely sort of way to think about it. But it's also really fun. Like it's not, it doesn't feel kind of preachy and sort of didactic-y, right? So I'm wondering what's your process in terms of balancing those? Like how do you strike that tone?
I feel like hard sometimes, right? So I wanted to make a book that included like lessons and things that I had learned that I didn't know when I was 16, right? Like I'm 33 now, and I have been through a lot since the ripe old age of 16, and I've learned a lot. And so I wanted to share some of those things so that other people, it doesn't take them as long to learn some of these lessons, like loving yourself and loving your body and appreciating who you are, and like figuring out how to communicate in a healthy way with people that you love and you care about. But I also don't want this to seem like you're picking up this book and it's this girl, this like lady you don't know who's telling you what to do with your life, because nobody likes that. So I wanted the characters to have these really real and frank discussions with each other, but also really enjoy each other, right? And have these light and fun moments, because I think that's what it's like when you're out with your friends, right? You talk about, my friends and I sometimes bounce from very heavy topics, and then suddenly we're joking, and it's like maybe we shouldn't be joking, but also we're humans and this is how we cope. And so I think having a balance between, yes, this is a very difficult thing that we need to address, but also I'm going to crack a joke about this Spotify playlist or this TikTok that I just saw, is very human. And so I tried to do that. And I know that for me, I have used humor as just like a coping mechanism in general in life, and I try to make light of a lot of things. And so I really wanted to have some sarcasm in there and some fun and a little lightness.
Yeah. So one last question before I'll open it up to the, and I have a lot of questions, but one last that I was really, that really struck me, and I guess this is because of sort of, what I do and what I teach, and sort of the relationship to that, because it strikes me that the book is really sort of tackles this issue of weight head on, right? That she's not shy about talking about. She's not shy about sort of thinking through that with the people around her and with herself. But then at the same time, she is surrounded. The whole world that she inhabits is a very diverse, diverse demographically, diverse socioculturally, diverse, economically. And a diverse sexually, gender-wise, right? Like there are all of these sort of different characters coming and going, but there's a kind of beautiful, nobody really cares that anybody, is not the same as them, right? In that way. And so I was really struck by that, like your choice to, maybe you can talk about the way you chose to sort of focus on maybe, I don't know if you did, right? But it seems like there's a focus on this one issue, and then everything around is just so beautifully like tolerant, you know. It's lovely.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
So I did really go into this book. I had my agenda. I was like, I'm writing about a fat brown girl. She's gonna fall in love, and people are gonna like her. That was like it, right? But then when I got in there, I, as a reader, had spent a lot of time thinking about what felt missing for me in other books, and talking with my friends and figuring that out. And so I tried to build this world for Charlie that feels very real. Like, she's growing up in this suburban town. It's mostly, straight white people kind of around her. She feels just like she doesn't really fit in, but then in her group of friends, she finds solace. And that's what it was like for me. I was growing up in this very homogenous town, but I was lucky to have friends who, there's a reason like a lot of brown kids sit together in the cafeteria, and it's because you have this, you have a connection. So whatever that connection is, for Charlie, she finds that in her best friend Amelia, and they are really connected. And so then from Charlie's identity, I really wanted to build out this world where I think the characters, so Amelia is a dark-skinned black woman, and she's also pansexual. And I wanted that to not even be really a thing. Like, I didn't want it to be a coming out story. I wanted it to be like, nope, this is who Amelia is. And I wanted to be intentional about putting those words on the page. So saying she's black, saying that she is pansexual, and making it so that it's not ambiguous, because I think when you are part of marginalized communities, you have to do a lot of guessing, or you try to find yourself in characters and you're like, well, that character is not exactly like me, but we're kind of alike in this way. And that can be really hard, especially I think when you're young, and you just don't feel like you see any part of yourself in a book or TV or a movie. And so I didn't want that to be a question. I just wanted it to be, yes, like, Brian has two moms. Like, we know people who have two moms, and it shouldn't be a weird thing to incorporate that into a teen book. And so I wanted to try and make this world that feels like the people we know and the people that we love, while also it's very much not a thing. Like, we don't necessarily stop to discuss that Brian has two moms. Like, he has, I think, a couple of throwaway lines of like, oh, I look like this mom, not that mom, just so you know, and then they kind of move on. And I think we have those interactions, and we are able to just be like, oh, okay, thanks for telling me, and then move on. And I see that especially, I feel like, with younger folks, and so I work with a lot of students in college, and I feel like it's not even a thing, when people are talking about their sexuality and stuff. And for me, that's a great progress from when I was in high school. So
yeah, absolutely. And even longer ago when I was in high school. And I do notice that with my kids' generation, that it's less of a thing, and I think that's a positive direction.
Totally agree.
Yeah. I'd like to open it up now for questions. Does anybody have? I see a hand. Yes.
Well, first of all, I love your dress.
Thank you. I tried to do something bookish.
So my question is, you're obviously older now, you have a family, job. So was it difficult, and kind of how did it feel on an emotional level to tap back into Charlie's age and mindset?
Yeah. So she, in case you couldn't hear, this person asked and pronouns?
She, her.
Okay, thank you. So she asked what it was like to be older and try to write like a teenager. And I think that's such a good question, because it's a challenge, right? Like, I'm certainly not 16 anymore. So I tried to actually listen to a lot of music that I loved when I was 16 years old, because I think music's really powerful, and it has this way of transporting you no matter where you kind of are in your life. You hear a song, and suddenly you're somewhere else. You're just, you know, I would listen to music that my friends and I would listen to like in the car as we're getting ready for the teen night, and suddenly I'm like that age again, and I'm nervous, and oh, is this person gonna look at me and like me, and what am I gonna wear? So I did that a lot, and I also personally feel like we kind of never grow out of our teen selves. I think we like mature, we change, we grow and we learn, but I think there's always like younger versions of ourselves still in there. And I'm always trying to like nourish that inner child, that inner teen in me. And so I tried to think back a lot on what was I like when I was 16? What would have made me feel whole? What would have made me feel more at ease, and how could I work those things into this book and try to give that gift to hopefully somebody else who picks this book up and who is feeling similarly and finally gets to see themselves or see an experience reflected at them that they have never really gotten to talk about with a friend. Like there's these scenes where we watch Charlie as she tries to go shopping with her thin and beautiful bestie, and she can't fit into anything in the store, and that can be a hard thing to talk about because it feels, you know, embarrassing or shameful or whatever else. So I wanted to talk about those things that mortified me as a teenager and that I didn't want to talk about then, and normalize it and put it in this book and be like, yeah, you're not the only one who's ever worried about like how they're gonna fit into the bleachers, or you're not the only one who's ever worried that, you know, this guy was terrible to you and you don't know, you know. So I wanted to just, I think, pay tribute to a lot of the feelings, because I think the feelings you have when you're a teen, they never really go away. And so we just kind of learn how to like cope with them a little bit better. But sometimes I'm crying the same way I was crying when I was 16, you know? So I think we all have things like that. So it's sort of just like reaching back and remembering who I was at that time, and then also consuming a lot of media and content created by young people, because I think people who are younger than me are like so smart and so brilliant, and I'm just constantly laughing when I'm on TikTok and like watching YouTube videos. And so I think if you're going to write stories for young people, I think you have to really like and admire and appreciate people younger than you. And that's how I come to writing, is I am like, yep, I have a lot to learn and I don't know anything and I'm old now, so please teach me things. So. That's a great question, thank you.
Other questions? Yeah.
I was just gonna say, related to so many things that you wrote about and said, like, so many like moments, I was like, oh my god, like absolutely 100% same.
Yay!
But it was really nice to see that written and like actually like expressed. Sometimes just like, but I was gonna ask, because you talked about music, like what would be specific like soundtrack or like song that you would connect with like your, because I think music is also really important.
Oh my god, this is so embarrassing. So this is really gonna date me. Okay. So when I was 16, I really loved the Backstreet Boys. And I will tell you, I have seen them in concert 16 times. And that is not an exaggeration, people. So I listened to a lot of them, as you can imagine.
Do they even know who they are?
Probably not. It's like,
do you guys know the Backstreet?
Like, yeah, okay. Like the 90s, like early 2000s was like my jam. And so I also listened to a lot of like old like R&B, like Ashanti and Ja Rule and like J-Lo and stuff that is not at all cool anymore, but that took me back to these times when I was younger and when I was in my room and just like turning my stereo all the way up because I had my burned CDs, yes, my burned CDs that I made where I had my mixes, and it just helps me like go back in time really and time travel. And I think that's what I love so much about music. So there's not a ton of music references in the book, but like Charlie and Amelia have this sweet moment where they're like sharing a Spotify playlist with each other at the beginning of the book. And I think music can be like its own little love language in a way. Thank you.
Other questions? Okay, I see one hand in the back. Yeah, in the blue, and then I see yours too.
Can you hear me clear?
Yes.
Okay. So in chapter 3 of your book, you talked about having the love for being at your work environment. Did that somehow unsubconsciously boost Charlie's mood in terms of woman empowerment and having that safe haven of being content with yourself?
That's an excellent question. Wow, you guys really did read the book. Like, thank you so much. I would definitely say so. So Charlie works in this office environment, right? But she's kind of surrounded by women in this office. And I think she gets a lot out of that, to be able to see women who are not critical of her, right? Because yes, she has her mom, but she has this like contentious push and pull relationship. But I think for Charlie, being in this environment where she can kind of be herself and kind of shed her skin a little bit is nice. So she talks about how she grew up in this same town with these same people who she's known forever, and they have known her forever. And so there's this like pressure to kind of perform as this person that they think you are. And then she is grappling with, well, what if I'm not that person? And so when she goes into this other environment and she's surrounded by these other women especially, and especially her boss, who she thinks is so cool because she's like the head of the company, right? Like, I think that gives her somebody to look up to in a positive kind of way, and work weirdly ends up becoming a little bit of a safe haven for her, and we kind of watch her as her and Brian become friends and work together there, and it, I think, just gives her the room to figure out who she is away from her home and away from even Amelia, who she adores, but away from other people, and kind of just be Charlie in this kind of nice way. That was a great question, thank you.
Yeah.
I teach 7th grade, and I shared the video that's on the Writers Institute webpage with my students today.
Yeah.
I don't know if other people saw it, but, and then we had a really nice conversation about how doing one kind thing can make such an impact in someone's life. I was wondering if maybe you would share that story, or if you wanted to comment about that, and if that idea is included in the book.
Yes, well, so first of all, thank you for teaching 7th grade, because I'm so sorry for who I was in 7th grade to my teachers. But yes, I would love to talk about that. So I am a big believer in just trying to be empathetic and like trying to build empathy as a society, as people. And so part of what we sort of see with Charlie is that when we meet her at the beginning of the book, she is so hard on herself. And I think we all can relate to that in some ways. Like, we are our harshest critics. And as she kind of learns to love herself, I think she starts to learn to give a little more grace to other people. And I know that personally has been my experience, is once I started to accept myself, suddenly I could look at other people and offer them a little bit more room and be like, well, you know, maybe they're experiencing something, or they're going through something, or it must be hard, or whatever. So I think that like working on yourself and working on like, and it sounds cheesy, but like your self-love and really being kind to yourself makes it so that you want to kind of be kind to other people too. And I certainly wanted to kind of include that in the book. Like, I want people to finish it and feel like they deserve kindness, right? And so not everything, I mean, I'm not a fool. The world is hard. It's real bad right now. It's stressful, and there's a lot going on. But I think being kind to yourself and being kind to others can also be drawing boundaries, right? Like knowing when you're in a toxic situation and that you sort of need to say, you know what, this is too much and I'm not going to deal with this. And so doing things that are sometimes hard can be a kindness to yourself, or it can be a kindness to other people. And then I think it has this ripple effect. So once you start to be okay with that, suddenly you can draw these lines in the sand and you can you just feel, I think, lighter as a person once you start, and it's nice. And I think if we were all a little more empathetic, we might not be in such like a crazy situation that we're in now. So I am team empathy and kindness all the way. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Stand up just so I can project a little bit.
Yeah.
I am a fellow old person who remembers Burn TV, so
Thank you for coming.
I was just wondering, you already mentioned how you used music and social media to help you get in the mindset of a person. Can you talk a little bit more about like the role that research plays in your fiction writing, if any?
Yeah. So I have to admit, I am mostly a writer who writes from all those feelings that I have bottled up inside of me. But I end up falling down the research rabbit hole for like plot and world building a lot. So I'm writing contemporary characters and writing contemporary stories, but I want to get certain details right about things. So this is especially pertinent in my next book that I wrote that I set in Bakersfield, California, which is not where I grew up, but it's just a place that I visited a couple of times. So I spent time researching, okay, well, what do houses look like in this area? Like, how would I describe it? What does the weather look like during this certain time of year? And so trying to, I guess, set the scene of where my characters are so that you, like when readers pick it up, they're not like, okay, I can't picture anything because you didn't describe anything to me. So that, I think, is where a lot of my research comes in. And I know people who do tons and tons of research beforehand, and I got to give it up to them because that's amazing. But I truly like write from vibes and feelings and hope for the best. And I have started to outline. I didn't do that for the first book, but then when as it turns out, if you have a deadline you have to meet, like you have to sit down and like do the work, and that's really hard if you don't have an outline and you're just working off vibes. So outlines and researching what that is definitely helped me with the second book. Thank you.
Yeah, I should have mentioned actually that her second book already has a publication date,
Yes.
right? February 1st?
Yeah, February 1st, 2022.
Yeah, so congratulations
Thank
on that
you.
as well.
It's
Yeah.
called No Filter and Other Lies, and I kind of get to explore my social media obsession and addiction. So it's like about this girl who, she's also fat and she's also brown, but the book doesn't center around her fatness or her brownness. And so I want to like have a book like Charlie's, it's like very much about that. And then this other book, like it's not a thing, right? Like it's just, that's who she is. And it's more about how we perceive ourselves on social media and how hard it can be when we're sort of seeing these like distorted views of ourselves and our friends and other people, and why did that person's photo get so many likes and nobody's commenting on mine. And so this poor girl, her name is Kat, and yes, she does catfish in this book. So she ends up stealing a friend's pictures because she is feeling insecure, and she makes a whole new person, and then she's kind of living out a life as this fake person. Don't do that, it's terrible.
But we all do a little bit of that sometimes, right?
Exactly.
So, yeah.
She just takes it to the next level.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have a question while we're waiting for other ones. I'm
Please.
curious about, you just mentioned this as you were talking, sort of, you know, the deadline and the research and the outline.
Yeah.
So what kind of a writer are you? Are you, I get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and write from 5 until 8, and then, or are you kind of when it
God, I
strikes
wish.
you? What's your process?
In case you couldn't tell, I'm a little chaotic. So I don't do that, although I wish I did. So I work full time. I have an adorable but also equally chaotic 2-year-old. I'm married, we have a dog, so there's like a lot going on in my house all the time. So I kind of write when I can, and I break a lot of writer rules. Like I've heard a lot of authors say like you have to write every day and you have to have like a certain process, and I don't write every day. I think about my writing a lot, and to me that's part of the process, is thinking about it and kind of daydreaming about it, and just like, okay, how does this character kind of feel, and like what would they do in a situation, and what might some dialogue be like between this person and another character in the book. And I very much think that all of that is part of the writing process, at least for me. And I know everyone's writing process looks different. And if I had it my way, I would just never be on deadline, and I would just write when I felt like it, but that's not how any of this works, as I found out the hard way. So with my second book, I did have an outline, and I plotted it, and I knew, okay, this is kind of what's gonna happen. It started out really rough, and then I would go in and go like chapter by chapter, like, okay, in this chapter, this is kind of what happens to this character, and this is like where we're hoping they end up by the end of the chapter. And then once I would start writing, I used that as a basis, and I tried to stick to it, but then sometimes things just they're not, like something's not working, or something in the plot is feeling off, and so I give myself permission to sort of let go of that when it's not feeling right. Like if I'm dreading pulling up a scene, maybe that scene's not working, and maybe I need to cut it, and maybe I need to try again. And I'm okay with that, even though it's really painful to lose words once you're like, oh God, I wrote 3 chapters and now they're all in the trash. But you gotta do what you gotta do to get a nice manuscript. And I will say, if you are trying to write a book, the first draft is always so bad. And it never gets better. Like, it's gonna be so bad every time, and don't feel bad about that. It's just gonna suck. And then it's gonna get really good, because you're gonna edit it, and you're gonna revise it, and you're gonna have people read it, and it's gonna get better. But I swear, when I got my draft back after I handed my second book in, I was like, I'm quitting writing. This is the worst thing anyone has ever written, and I can't do this anymore. And then as I was editing, I was like, all right, this is shaping up. Like, I'm liking where this is going. So it's just chaos, or at least it is for me.
Yeah, I guess I should have asked also, when do you sleep? Because it sounds like you are pretty busy.
I am, but I also love sleep. So I'm just a weird multitasker. Like, I also have ADHD, so I feel like I'm just like I can get in these modes where I'm like, I'm only writing, and then I'm doing that for 5 hours, and my husband's like, are you good? Do you need water? Like, and so, yeah, my kid thankfully still naps, so I do a lot while she's napping or after she's in bed.
Naps are good.
Naps are good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Other questions? Yeah.
Yeah.
I was wondering, because this book definitely falls into a category for me of representative literature, or of being able to find personal identity in characters. I wanted to know what other literature in that vein did you read or experience in your childhood that helped create fodder for this novel? So, like, an example I would think of is I don't remember the author, but it's The Duck, and it's a story that follows a young big girl who's living out of high school and being, made a pariah for something she can't control. So I wanted to know what other pieces of media helped, guide you towards this goal.
Yeah, that's a great question. So for me, I am embarrassed to say that I feel like I didn't read a lot of books where I felt like I saw myself until I was maybe college age. I just had a hard time finding them, right? And so I would do my best to try to find myself in pieces of other characters that I was reading. And my school very much did the Holden Caulfield and the To Kill a Mockingbird, and it wasn't until I was a senior in high school that I had even read a book by a person of color, right? And like, that's rough when you're trying to develop your identity and figure out who you are and your place. And and figure out, like, does anybody want to read what I would write when you're not able to read books by authors who are like you? So when I was in college, I discovered a book called My Big Fat Manifesto, which is by this author, Susan Vaught. And it was about a fat girl who writes, she's a journalist, and she writes this column, and it's all about what it's like living in a fat body as a woman. And so that was, I think, one of the first ones where I was like, wait a minute. You can write about fat people? Like, that is so crazy. And also that you could use the word fat, which, like, is still kind of a word that makes a lot of people uncomfortable. Like, I'm okay with it, but I understand why people don't like the word. And I made the deliberate choice to put fat in the title because I wanted to reclaim this, like, 3-letter word that had been so painful for my whole life and have it be a thing, like, you look at me, I am fat, like, and I just want it to be like a descriptor and not like a painful insult, right? So I read that book, and I was still very, I think, like, having body image issues, and so it didn't empower me as much as it did I reread it recently, and I was like, wait, this book is so cool, and it still holds up. And so it wasn't really until I read Dumplin by Julie Murphy, kind of around the same time I read The Sun Is Also a Star by Nicola Yoon, which is this, like, gorgeous love story that happens over a day. So Dumplin is about this fat girl. It's also a Netflix movie, and she wants to kind of buck the pageant tradition in her small hometown. And we kind of follow her as she does that, and then at that same time, I also had read Jenny Han's To All the Boys I've Loved Before. So it was like this trifecta. I read those 3 books kind of around the same time, and it was like a light bulb went off, and I was like, whoa. Okay, so books by Black authors, Asian authors, and fat authors. I can do this. And it was not until I read all of those in succession and felt so connected to the characters that I thought there could be room for a story like the one that had been brewing in my head to sort of come out there. And that's why I think we talk about representation in media, because it creates, like, once you see yourself, it's like a door just opens and this whole, like, world opens up for you, and suddenly you have the courage to create. You have the courage to just be yourself and to sort of, like, shout your identities and reclaim space that in a world that has told you maybe that you don't deserve to take up space. And so that is, I hope, like, I hope my little book in some small way starts to reclaim that space that a lot of us have felt like we didn't get to have for a really long time. Thank you. Yeah.
We have time for a couple more questions. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm interested in, you were a journalist. You
I
worked
was.
at a newspaper.
Yes.
But you also, in your fiction, you chose the YA category.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like there's kind of a blurring and crossover. How do you define YA?
Yep.
Are you going to stick with that now? Are you going to try adult fiction? You could talk about the category.
Yeah. So I love YA, and I loved YA before I even knew what young adult was, right? So, like, actually when I was growing up, I think it was just called teen, and, like, that was the section in, like, Barnes & Noble or Borders, rest in peace, where you used to go look for books. It was like the teen section. And then after I wasn't a teen, and kind of as I was getting older, like my senior year in high school, and we were reading things like To Kill a Mockingbird, I thought, oh, the natural progression of you as a reader is you graduate, quote unquote, from teen books and you move on to literary fiction, right? And so when I was in college, so I majored in journalism and in English, and I took some creative writing classes, and I thought, okay, well, this is, if you want to be a writer, like, this is what you have to do. You have to move on from the teen genre, and you have to do literary fiction. You have to do adult fiction. And I was always drawn to contemporary stories, so I'm like, okay, so I guess I'll write a contemporary something for adults if I want to go that route. But then I was like still secretly reading YA books and like for fun, and I was embarrassed to like share this with people because I'm like, oh, I'm not a teenager anymore, this book's not for me, I'm just reading it for fun, haha. But like I enjoyed it, and it was something I kept, like a genre I kept coming back to over and over again. And so I did try to write and dabble in like adult literature and for grown-ups, right? And I kept feeling like the voice was not me, right? And it's interesting because I think when you're a journalist, you have to get comfortable writing in different voices, and we get really good at being that like chameleon, right? So like if you're writing something about like the town meeting, it's a totally different vibe than if you're interviewing somebody about their performance at a theater. And so I took a class in college that talked a lot about voice in writing, and in that class I started to experiment with writing in first person and in ways I didn't know that you could write. And I had gotten so used to writing papers the way that you write papers, right? Where you're like, okay, I need to add as many words as I can, use the passive voice, and just try to like, yeah. And this is how they teach you in high school. And it's like the essays, right? And you just, so you get, I feel like I got so stuck in that mindset that was how I had to write. And until I took this class my senior year and learned about voice, I didn't realize you could write in different ways. And so it was like a combination, I think, of always gravitating towards these first person stories, because YA is often told in first person, and knowing you can write kind of the way you think, and you can like tell like little jokes in your writing if you want, and you can like be cutesy, and everything doesn't have to be a complete sentence, and you can have fragments and run-ons. And so it was like the freedom, I feel like, that I felt in YA is why I kept coming back to it, because I was like, this feels like the most authentic voice when I'm writing and I want to tell a story. And the age range of who reads it, I felt like I had the most to give back to that, because I wanted to make stories that I wished I could have read when I was that age. And I was like, you know what, adults, if you want to read my books, I love you, and that's wonderful, but you have a lot of books to choose from. So I'm going to work on teen books, and you're always welcome in my circle, but this is kind of what I know and what I feel like, where I feel like I can make the most difference, I think. And that's when we're talking about things like representation and making sure we're, like people talk a lot about like windows and mirrors in like education, and so you want to hold up a mirror to people, right, who don't often get to see themselves, or have that window to people who maybe don't share the identity with the character, but who they can see into this world. And so that's what I wanted to do. Like Charlie is hopefully this person who feels like a friend, and so either you super relate to her and you're like, oh my god, I'm Charlie, or you're like, I like Charlie and she's my pal, and now I know a little bit more about what it's like for my Puerto Rican friends, or I know what it's like for my fat friends, or whatever, insert identity here. So yeah, so I think I'll probably stick in YA at least for a little bit longer.
So one last question maybe to wrap up is, what was it like to, like, we're all a little bit in transition, right? We're maybe shell-shocked, here we are. It's been a couple of years, a year and a half at least, right? Mm-hmm. So what was that like? That's when you were writing? Is that?
Oh God. So so I wrote the book. I started writing it in like 2016. I finished it in 2018, and then I just like had this finished book, and I was like, that was fun. I enjoyed that. And then it was just literally sitting in my Google Drive, done. And I like moved on. And then I turned 30, and I was like so self, you wrote a book and you're not even going to try to like do anything with it. That seems really silly. So I had told myself, you know what, just try to like query some agents. And so I spent time Googling, like, I wrote a book, now what? Just to find out how you actually are supposed to do that. And, you know, did a lot of research and went through the whole process. And as it turns out, publishing can be quite slow. So I got a deal in 2019. After working with my literary agent, we revised it. Then we heard back from a publisher, and the original release date was set for 2020. And we all know what happened in 2020. So my book, as many did, got pushed back. And I was so grateful because I was like a shell of a human playing Animal Crossing, just like trying to keep my baby alive. And there's no way I could have done like marketing and stuff for a book because my mind was just so not there. So this ended up coming out in February 2021, and thank God, because then I could do things like virtual panels, and I could spend time thinking about what I wanted to say about the book. And I did write a whole other book during the pandemic.
Did you?
Yes.
Yeah.
So that was book 2.
That's when book 2 got written.
And it was really hard. Like, I'm not gonna lie, that book was painful. Like, it's like every word felt like effort, and I think that a lot of us can probably relate to that. Just even if it's not writing, I feel like doing anything during the pandemic while trying to survive was a challenge, and I think that's okay. And the more we talk about like how, oh man, it's like that's hard, the better, right? Because we don't want to. I think it was a traumatic time. It was a traumatic time for me. It still is sometimes. And you can still sometimes create, as I did with my second book, but it wasn't easy. And it's been surreal. Like, how weird was it for me in February 2021 when I'm like, well guys, we don't have a vaccine or anything yet, but I wrote a book. Does anybody want to buy it? Does anybody want? No one has jobs, and but you want to buy this? Like, it was so weird. But I tried to think like, well, maybe it offers some escape, because writing for me is a huge escape, right? And I love to read and escape into those books. And so that was how I tried to think about it. And I tried to think, well, if someone picks this up and they get to forget that there is a pandemic happening right now, that's a really great thing. And so I wanted to take that on as kind of my responsibility of like, I'm here, I did write this thing. You don't have to buy it. You can get it from your library. There's like, I'll do anything. If you just want to look at it, that's great. It's pretty. It's like the pictures are nice. There's gold on it, you know? And so it was truly surreal. And sometimes I'm still like, wow, I really did that. I just did that, and I survived. So it was weird.
It worked for me, right? And also, I mean, it's a lovely, lovely book. But it really, you know, when I was reading it, and I'm sure all of us have had these moments reading things or watching things on TV, and like, wait a minute, they just went to a coffee shop, like, and they sat at a table, 10 of them, you know, like that's what they did, right? And so was this kind of jolt of, there's another world out there.
Yes, and I've thought a lot about like, do I want to make books that have the pandemic in it, right? And for me, it's still too fresh. Like, we're clearly still living in it, and I want to break from that. And so like when I'm watching my TV shows and they have the pandemic in it, I'm like, boo, I hate this. And so I don't think I will, but maybe someday I might incorporate it, but now it's just like, I just want to break from it.
Yeah.
So,
although the issue of social media, and I haven't read your second book, obviously, but that's become so much a bigger part of a lot of people's lives, I think.
Oh, totally.
Yeah.
As a trusty social media manager, can I just do a PSA of like, please be nice to your social media managers. They're like trying so hard and they don't have all the answers, and it's usually not their fault, whatever thing you're mad about. So like, just like, if you could be like a thumbs up emoji, or like, I hope you have a good day. Just do that. And it goes back to like our empathy thing. Just, you know, it's hard. Everybody's having a hard time. So, yeah, I get yelled at a lot. So like, if you could just be nice to your social media manager, if that's your one takeaway, yes, I accept. Like,
How about just be nice?
yeah, that works too.
Yeah. Okay, any last questions? Well, then join me, please, in thanking Crystal, and then we can, I guess you'll sign,
Thank
right?
you. Yes, thank you guys so much.